This week, Israel continues to escalate its fight with its neighbors in the Middle East, while the US continues its fight with its greatest enemy, the weather. US politicians just can't seem to stop committing crimes, and Nebraska is asking the question, how do we get Trump more Electoral College votes without convincing any more people to vote for him? All of that today on T-Dubs. Welcome to T-Dubs, I'm your host SolarPop, and this week was pretty much the same as any other week, except Netanyahu revealed himself to be Kira by pulling out his death note to take out practically all of the Iranian-backed Hezbollah's leaders, including Hassan Nasrallah, who had been the leader of Hezbollah for over 30 years. But I'm sure Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei isn't bothered by this at all. Hezbollah is just a terror group for their proxy war with Israel, after all. There's no shortage of those.
We also heard from Iran's supreme leader urging Muslims via social media today to rise up against Israel.
Now, that statement could just be Israeli propaganda. But either way, it shows at least one side is trying to incite its people to rise up against the other. Remind me again what those sides are? Hey, Netanyahu, listen. I know the little guy standing up to the overwhelming enemy and evening the odds with faith in a higher power is kind of on brand for Israel, but maybe you should take a moment to listen to what that higher power has to say.
The United States has made clear, along with the G7, the European Union, partners in the Gulf, so many other regions, that we believe the way forward is through diplomacy, not conflict.
Moving on from Israel's continued fight with its greatest enemy, its neighbors, let's head to the US, where it continues its fight with its greatest enemy, the weather. And I hold no shame for reusing that joke, and I will continue to use it until it stops being true. On September 26, Hurricane Hellene made landfall in the southeastern US, making it the second hurricane to impact the region this month after Hurricane Francine made landfall on September 11th. Carolinians and Virginians are no strangers to hurricanes, but Helene was ready to counter that preparedness by adjusting her plan of attack to approach from the west before making its last stand in southern Appalachia. Are we sure we're still talking about hurricanes? As of the time of recording, 52 people have lost their lives to the storm, in addition to an estimated $15 to $26 billion in property damage. And the White House has approved emergency declarations for Alabama, Florida, Georgia, North and South Carolina, and Virginia. This comes as two other storms are approaching the U.S., Hurricane Isaac and, for now, Tropical Storm Joyce. But according to the National Hurricane Center, both are expected to be downgraded in the coming days. But I'm sure your news source of choice will likely try to make it seem as though this is the trifecta of storms that will bring about Armageddon in the U.S. Moving on to politics in the US, where your senators have a high likelihood of being caught driving under the influence or engaging in some form of deviancy. Republican Senator of West Virginia Mike Maroney was caught doing both. On September 23rd, Maroney was arrested for driving under the influence and somehow driving with expired registration and without registration at the same time, after what McCann, West Virginia police chief describes as numerous traffic violations. If the wanton disregard for the safety of his constituents wasn't enough, last month he was charged with indecent exposure after engaging in an overt act of gratification in a gambling parlor. And I have to ask, is that really any better than just saying he was? The term here only leaves open one question. Or not. But an overt act of gratification could be anything. Was he pinching his nipples and tucking while whistling Dixie? Was he trying to get the people at the slot machines to suck his toes? Did he have a cam girl on speakerphone telling him how stupid he was for losing the election because he wanted to allow unvaccinated kids to participate in team sports? Was he trying to have sex with a couch? Not just any couch, specifically this one. An overt act of gratification leaves open the door for too many questions no one wants the answer to, but can't help but ask. And finally, we do what Americans have traditionally chosen not to do and move to Nebraska, where Governor Jim Pillen is pushing for Nebraska to change to the winner-take-all system employed by 48 other states to secure more electoral votes for Trump in the 2024 election. Maine is the only other state not to adhere to a winner-take-all system for the Electoral College. And today, I'd like you to join me as we learn about why these two states have foregone this system. To do this, we need to explain the Electoral College, what it is, why and how it works, the problems it creates, and how we can fix them. The Electoral College was first established in Article 1, Sections 2 and 3 of the Constitution. Section 2 established the number of representatives for each state based on the population of those states because our founding fathers recognized that all citizens deserve representation, and yes, it would take far too long for policy to catch up with that sentiment. After all, one of the major calls to revolution was no taxation without representation. They didn't want one group of people making decisions for another group of people with very different lives than their own, the way the Imperial British had. Section 3 established that each state would have 2 senators so that every state would have equal representation within the Senate. Whether or not those votes should also have electors in the presidential election is its own problem that I'll address later. But for now, the basic principle was to prevent Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York alone from dictating policy that could be detrimental to the lives of people in the less populated areas by giving equitable representation to all citizens, regardless of circumstances. In fact, do you know what the first article proposed as an amendment to the Bill of Rights was? It was not the freedom of speech, but rather a system to regulate the number of representatives to maintain equitable representation. But it was blocked by Federalists from Delaware and Pennsylvania, in addition to Federalists from Georgia, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, who also opposed the remainder of the Bill of Rights, by preventing it from getting the 3/4 majority needed to be ratified. If any one of those states had voted to ratify Article 1, our Electoral College would look very different to what it does today. We often hear things like, our founding fathers felt so strongly about the freedom of speech that they made it the first priority in the Bill of Rights. Well, if placement is an indicator of what they felt the most strongly about, Article 1 tells us that equitable representation was their highest priority. And we know the Electoral College at least somewhat works in that regard because we've had presidents from both major political parties. So, equitable representation of minority groups in the country, you say? I feel like I've been hearing a lot about how important that is from the left lately. So, obviously, that must mean they're in favor of the Electoral College.
Arbitrary, nonsensical rules around the election, they're stupid. But it's not a Nebraska issue. Let's just get rid of the Electoral College.
Oh, I see. You're only in favor of equitable representation until a lack of representation gives your political party an overwhelming advantage. Got it. And that's not to say there isn't a major problem with our current Electoral College. And that brings us back to where this started with winner take all. Winner take all is the system in which all state electors are awarded based on the candidate that wins the popular vote within a state. Think what our founding fathers were trying to prevent at the national level and scale it down to the state level. For most of us, winner take all has been the way the Electoral College has been run our entire lives. And it'd be totally understandable for you to think it's always been that way. But it hasn't, and was never intended to be. In fact, in the first election after the Constitution was drafted, only 2 of the 13 states at the time employed the winner-take-all system. Winner-take-all didn't really take root in most states until the 1830s, when states were pulling out all the stops to maintain their status as free enslaved states. So, as has always been the case in this country, arguments for states' rights have always been at the expense of individual ones, for better and worse in this case. So what if the founding fathers never meant for a winner-take-all system of electorates? That doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Tell that to the 4.5 million Californians whose districts voted for Trump only for their electoral votes to be given to Biden. Or how about the 10.9 million Texans whose districts voted for Biden only for their electoral votes to be given to Trump? How can you expect to motivate voters to engage in our civic process when their votes are being cast for the candidate they don't support, and with some states in absurd numbers? You can't. And the entire reason why state legislators are able to be stacked with puppets for larger interest groups is because the winner-take-all system makes it to where you aren't incentivized to vote and allows for those state legislatures to run virtually, if not entirely, unopposed under the noses of their constituents. However, if your state abandons winner-take-all, allowing your district's vote to be counted for the candidate it should, your vote will matter. Unlike states, districts flip all the time, so your voice could finally make a difference. But that's not all that needs to happen. Now we need to talk about the Senate electorates. The Senate electorates give inequitable voting power to smaller states and DC. Thanks to the 23rd Amendment, DC is given the same number of electoral votes as the state with the least amount of electoral votes. Since every state gets 2 Senate votes, and some states only have 1 district, that means DC gets 3 electorates. Now, there's an issue there. In populous states, each district is composed of around 700,000 and gets 1 vote, and the state as a whole gets 2. So if you're in, say, California, who has 53 districts, those 2 votes divided into the 53 districts means your district of 700,000 people is worth approximately 1.04 votes. However, if you are in DC, your population of 670,000 is worth 3 votes. If you are in Wyoming, your 1 district of 580,000 is also worth 3 votes. Do you see the problem here? Because we didn't adopt Article 1, the less populated districts that would need an equitable boost already have it without the Senate vote. So the Senate vote ends up overcorrecting and giving them far more electoral power than was ever intended. So, how do we fix it? Well, the first thing that we need to do would be to ratify Article 1 of the Bill of Rights. It's still floating around Congress and is just waiting for a moment in time where it could get a 3/4 majority. Article 2 also swam around in limbo until it became the most recent amendment to be ratified, the 27th, back in 1992. That's right, it's been over 30 years since an amendment has been ratified, and it was an amendment that had been in Congress for over 200 years. Not what I think the Founding Fathers intended when they dedicated Article 5 of the Constitution to the amendment process, but that's just me. Second, and this is necessary even if the first step is functionally impossible, we need to do the opposite of what Governor Jim Pillen is attempting to do and put an end to the winner-take-all system. Doing so serves the conservative function of our Founding Fathers' intentions to keep one ideology from dictating the lives of people with different ideologies, while also appealing to the left's stated goals of diversity and inclusion. This is something that can only happen on the state level, so write your representatives and pay attention to who you're voting for in your state legislature. Third, if number 1 proves to be impossible, we need to axe the practice of assigning electors for state senators. When the Founding Fathers included it in the Constitution, they could not have anticipated Article 1 of the Bill of Rights being stuck in deadlock for over 200 years, or that we would have states more populous than our entire nation at the time. But that begs the question, what would that look like? Well, you're in luck because I mapped out the 2020 presidential election and made a spreadsheet for the outcomes of the elections over the past 20 years using steps 2 and 3. And it turns out the only result it overturned was Romney and Obama, which, in hindsight, If Romney wins in 2012, we don't get Trump in 2016. The Republican Party stays boring, the left doesn't start freaking out about losing their rights, and our country doesn't lose its collective minds. Think of what we would be like now if only Romney hadn't been Mormon. Anyway, I'm Soldapop, and this has been T-Dubs. Remember, you can buy the truth. You've just got to pay attention. And hopefully, next week will be better than this one.